Hey there. So it occurs to me the last two videos I've done have been on reproduction knives. So I thought I would just do another video and talk about reproductions and when I might want one and what I look for one when I do get one. First of all, I don't really have that many reproductions. Those 5 knives you see there on the table are the only ones I have that are really reproductions or trying to be reproductions. I've got a couple other knives over here to the side that kind of fit in, kind of don't. I want to talk about those too. I would just like to say that first of all, I would always like to get the original knife over a reproduction. I mean, I like to collect authentic vintage knives, so I most always want to get the original over a reproduction. However, I might buy a reproduction, kind of as a placeholder in my collection until I can find and acquire an original. That's what I did with this very first official Boy Scout of America knife from New York Knife Company. I bought the Shad reproduction that was put out on the 75th anniversary of the Boy Scouts. And I've had that in my collection of Boy Scout knives until I was able to find the original first Boy Scout knife. And when I was able to acquire this, then I sold off the reproduction. Also, I think I would buy a reproduction or have bought these reproductions when the originals are just too difficult to find or would take too long to acquire or just would be too expensive to acquire. So those are reasons. For instance, these Remington bullet knives. This is a reproduction by Camillus. It's the R4466 small muskrat. It's just a fine knife. And these can be had. You can find the originals. This is the Jumbo Trapper, the R1128, also by Camillus. That's a 1988 reproduction. This is the 1989 effort. You can find the originals of either one of those. You will pay a lot of money for them. But if you were trying to collect, say, all of the Remington bullet knives, there's 11 different patterns, there's a couple different handle treatments, you may never be able to find all of them. So there may be a place there where you would buy a reproduction to represent the ones you were missing. Also, for instance, on cost, here is the reproduction of the M2 paratroopers knife I just recently did a video on. And you can find these. As a matter of fact, you can find them in the original bone, the very first versions. But they're going to cost you $400 to $600, which would have been more than I paid for all of my other military pocket knives plus this reproduction. And so it just wasn't worth that to me to pay that much for one knife in that collection that's really, not like a core collection of mine or something. So when the original is just more than you would care to pay, maybe a reproduction would fit the bill. So basically, I'm looking at, buying a reproduction if I just need a placeholder until I can find the original, or I think I will never get the original, or I just don't want to pay up for the original. So when I do buy a reproduction, what am I looking for? Well, in my mind, a good reproduction has to meet 2 requirements. First of all, it has to be a pretty close copy of the original. It's got to be the right pattern, the right dimensions, the right shape and combination of blades. It has to be true to the markings, as much as possible, I guess. The materials. You're never going to get all those things probably, but if you can get 3 out of 4 or 5 out of 6, whatever, you're doing pretty well. And I think that these Remington bullet knives, these 2 in particular anyway, do a really good job of meeting those requirements. They're pretty accurate representations of the originals, and so they kind of they're not all there. They're about 90% there, but they do a pretty good job of copying, even down to the original materials. I can't say that about all Remington bullet knives, but there are a few of them, including these 2, I think are pretty good copies. The other thing about a reproduction that I look for, other than being a close copy of the original, I think the quality has to at least approach the original. And again, in the case of these Remington knives by Camillus, these reproductions, I think they do a good job of that. No, they're not probably as high quality built as the originals, but they're close enough so that when you have them and handle them, you don't feel like you have a cheap copy in your hands. This paratrooper's knife, back to that, these were not great knives when they were built. These were made out of stamped sheet metal. They were mass produced. They were just, for a very short-term use there in combat. They were probably considered disposable knives. So the originals really weren't that high quality. This reproduction is quality enough. I'm sure that it's every bit as high quality as the originals, so that's perfectly fine too. Now here's a very affordable reproduction. I don't know that a lot of people know that this is a reproduction, but this is the Rough Rider camp knife. Their first effort at a camp knife. And it's actually a very close reproduction of Case's camp or scout knife, the 6445R. And Case discontinued that in the 70s, so I guess Rough Rider was free to pretty well copy it. But I've done a video comparing this knife to that Case knife, kind of point by point, tool by tool. If you'd like to go watch that, I'll put the link up here somewhere, and you can see this knife compared against its inspiration. But it turns out that it's a pretty close copy to that Case 6445R. And it's a nail breaker. Whoops, wrong one. I'm trying to pull out. There we go. The long screwdriver. That's the same as on Case. The punch, very similar. Everything. The handles, the bone handles are different, of course, but and the construction's a little different. But this is a pretty close copy. And it was a $15 knife, whereas the Case nowadays, any of them cost you over $100, even kind of beat up. The quality is good for a $15 knife. Is it as good as the original Case? Of course not. It's a $15 knife from China, but it's good enough that when you are, have it in your hand and you're opening it or trying to open it, you don't feel like you got some kind of flimsy little fake in your hand. Now I've got another Rough Rider here on the table. This is a more recent effort of theirs for a camp knife. It's the Camp King. And is it a good reproduction? Well, yes and no. The reason I say that is because, first of all, on the quality side, yes. It not only approaches the original in quality, it far exceeds it. I learned from a video at Knife Chats with Tobias, and I'll put the link up here somewhere, that by the time the Imperial Camp Kings had the safety can opener up here on the main blade end, they were produced as shell knives. Now, prior to World War II, they had solid bolsters and a solid composite cover. But this knife has solid bolsters, bone covers, a real shield and pins, whereas the Camp Kings in this configuration were actually shell knives. So what that meant was fake bolsters, fake covers, fake shields, fake pins. They even had a detachable bail that was faked to look like a pin-on bail. So a totally faux appearance on the outside because they were clip-on metal sides. And this Camp King is built like a traditional slip joint pocket knife with all those real parts. So quality far exceeds the original. So wins in that regard, but again, it's not a very accurate copy of the original because of those same reasons. It's just built very differently and built very better. So that's Camp King by Rough Rider. That's a reproduction, and it's very high quality compared to the original, but it's not really very close copy. Okay, let's look at a couple other knives. This Boker camp knife or sports messer. Is it a reproduction? Well, no, definitely not. And the reason being is Boker says that this is the longest continuously produced knife of this type. That they've been making this knife since 1869 when they crossed the river over into Zolligen, Germany and set up shop there. So since this knife has never really been out of production, it can't be a reproduction. It's very true to those original knives. I mean, there's some differences, particularly with this knife. This one has desert ironwood scales. Today they put different cover treatments on these knives, but the originals would have been staghorn or a jig bone stag. And of course the can opener has evolved in shape and function over time. But otherwise it's a pretty true, pretty true to the originals there. Here is my Shad & Morgan Scout knife. Is it a reproduction? I think so, but I'm really not sure to what knife. First of all, this is a Queen-made knife, and you know, this knife was made in like 2013 by Queen, and Shad & Morgan ceased business in the early 30s, like 1930. So this is kind of a reproduction of a Shad & Morgan knife with the Shad & Morgan tang stamps and things. But I don't know that Shad & Morgan ever made a four-bladed equal end scout knife like this. I've never seen an original, and I don't know of any images from a catalog. They may have, I just don't know. What it looks to me like, it looks more like a reproduction of a Utica or Cutmaster camp knife or scout knife, because they use this style of can opener in that position on many different knives for many years. But it could also be an early case knife that they're copying here. Some of the early case scout knives had that can opener. It's hard to tell. Now, as far as the quality, it actually exceeds probably those early scout knives, which it may be copying, because they were built to be used. They were utility knives, and this knife was really built to be, you know, collector's piece. Okay, well, that's just a look at some reproductions and some other knives. Just something to talk about. Look at some knives, you know, reproductions, why you might want to get one occasionally, what I look for when I do get one. And I hope you found that interesting and helpful. As always, I appreciate you watching. I really do. Thank you. And have fun collecting.